In July of 2014, a demolition crew was methodically dismantling an abandoned grain silo complex on the industrial outskirts of Chicago. The hydraulic claw of an excavator tore away a wall of rusted steel, exposing a narrow grain chute the blueprints indicated should be empty. It was not. Wedged deep within, lodged under 2 decades of rubble and decay, was a human form. The foreman's initial log entry called it an obstruction. The coroner's report would call it a tomb. It took a specialist team 6 hours to carefully extract the skeleton and the tattered remnants of a company uniform. At that moment, the cold case file on the disappearance of Robert Kim, a 32-year-old delivery driver who had vanished into a blizzard on the night of March 12, 1994, was reopened. It was now a homicide investigation. March 12, 1994, was the kind of day that reminded Chicago of its brutalist heart. A blizzard was descending, its first icy tendrils wrapping around the city's towers. For Robert Kim, it was just another Tuesday. He worked his first shift at a dry cleaner's, the steam and chemical scent clinging to his clothes, then changed into the crisp black uniform of a high-end catering company. He was 32, an immigrant from South Korea, a man who moved through the city with a quiet efficiency that rendered him almost invisible. His life was a study in meticulous routine. Every paycheck was divided with mathematical precision. A small portion for his rent on a spare, clean apartment, a smaller portion for food, the vast majority wired back to his family in Seoul. His younger sister was attending university, a dream funded by her brother's relentless double shifts 6,000 miles away. He rarely spoke of this, but it was the engine that drove him. He was known for his reliability, a man who never cut a corner, never took what wasn't his. That night, his final delivery took him to a charity gala in the affluent Lincoln Park neighborhood. He navigated the service corridors of a sprawling mansion, a silent observer in a world of wealth and influence he would never inhabit. He collected the used catering equipment, loaded the van, and signed the final paperwork with his supervisor at 11:30 p.m. Everything was accounted for, as always. His supervisor would later tell police that Kim had declined a ride, insisting he didn't want to be a bother. The bus stop was just a block away. The last confirmed sighting of Robert Kim was of a solitary figure standing under the weak orange glow of a street lamp, his collar turned up against the wind as the snow began to fall in thick, blinding sheets. He was waiting for the bus that would take him home. The bus arrived at its scheduled time, its tires crunching through the accumulating snow. The doors hissed open into the storm, then closed again. The next morning, when Robert Kim failed to appear for his shift at the dry cleaners, his manager called his apartment. The phone rang and rang, unanswered. There was no struggle, no note, no disturbance, just an empty apartment, a bank account that would never be touched again, and a profound, unending silence. The scene at the base of the silo was one of controlled, almost surgical chaos. Forensic anthropologists in white coveralls worked under the glare of portable floodlights, their brushes and trowels moving with a delicacy that seemed alien amidst the surrounding industrial decay. The air was thick with the smell of rust and damp earth. Every scoop of debris was a potential exhibit. They documented the position of the skeleton, which was wedged headfirst into the chute, a posture inconsistent with an accidental fall and highly suggestive of a deliberate, forceful insertion. The initial examination took place on site in a temporary tent. The hyoid bone was intact, no strangulation. The skull, however, told a different story. Multiple compression fractures radiating from a point of impact above the right temple. The cause of death was unequivocal, massive blunt force trauma. Robert Kim had not succumbed to the cold. He had been murdered. As one of the examiners carefully worked to free the victim's left hand from the rotted fabric of his coat sleeve, something glinted. It was small, heavy, and out of place. Tucked deep within the frayed cuff, as if hidden by a final desperate act or a freak accident, was a solid silver dessert spoon. It was antique in design, its surface tarnished, but its quality unmistakable. Engraved on the handle, in an ornate stylized script, was a single letter, P. The discovery fundamentally changed the investigation. This was no longer just about identifying a killer, it was about deciphering a message left for 20 years in a steel tomb. The first key questions began to form on the investigators' whiteboards, each one a micro-hook pulling them deeper into the past. Who had access to this abandoned industrial complex in 1994? Who knew that this specific grain chute would remain undisturbed for 2 decades? And the most pressing question of all, how did a fine silver spoon, the kind used in the city's wealthiest homes, end up in the sleeve of a delivery driver's uniform? The location of the body spoke of a planned disposal, an effort to erase a man from existence. But the spoon spoke of a connection, a link between the victim and a world he was never meant to be a part of. This was not a random act of violence. It was a meticulously planned operation designed to guarantee a silence as complete and as cold as the concrete foundation of the silo itself. The original investigation into Robert Kim's disappearance in 1994 was tragically brief. It was suffocated by the very blizzard into which he had vanished. With the city buried under 2 feet of snow, police and emergency services were stretched to their breaking point. Kim was just one of dozens of missing persons reports filed that week. His case file, number 947281, shows a perfunctory but predictable series of steps. A wellness check at his empty apartment, an interview with his 2 employers, a canvass of local hospitals and shelters. Within 72 hours, the working theory had solidified into a near-certain conclusion. Robert Kim, a man with no known enemies, no debts, and no criminal history, had attempted to walk home in a historic storm and had tragically succumbed to the elements. His body, detectives reasoned, was likely buried in a snowdrift, waiting for the spring thaw to be discovered. It was a neat, logical, and tragically common explanation for a city that regularly lost its most vulnerable to the winter's brutal indifference. A detective did make one follow-up call regarding Kim's final delivery. The owner of the Lincoln Park mansion, a man whose name carried significant weight in Chicago's financial circles, was polite but firm. He assured the officer that the charity gala had concluded without incident. The staff were professional, the guests were respectable, and nothing was out of place. He provided a partial guest list upon request. It was a roster of the city's elite. Among the names was Warren Pike, a noted art and antiques appraiser. The line of inquiry was deemed a dead end. There was no concerted effort to obstruct justice. There didn't need to be. The social and bureaucratic inertia was enough. Probing the movements of Chicago's most powerful citizens over the disappearance of an immigrant delivery driver seemed like a foolish waste of resources when a perfectly logical explanation, the blizzard, was readily available. The investigation stalled not because of a direct order, but because of an unspoken consensus. When spring arrived and the mountains of snow melted away, Robert Kim's body was not among those recovered from the city's parks and alleyways. His file was moved from missing to cold case, effectively closing the book on his life. The silence that followed was not merely an absence of evidence. It was a form of complicity, a collective, institutional shrug that allowed a brutal murder to be misfiled as a sad accident, burying the truth more effectively than any snowstorm ever could. In the sterile environment of a police evidence room, Detective Patrick O'Rourke, a man nearing retirement, spent hours examining the silver spoon. For him, it was more than a clue. It was a ghost from his early days as a beat cop, a small, solid piece of a puzzle he vaguely remembered but had never understood. His team, shielding the spoon's existence from the press, began the painstaking work of tracing its lineage. Antique silver experts were consulted. Within a week, the answer came back, definitive and unsettling. The monogram and design belonged to an incredibly rare silver set commissioned in the 1920s for the Pike family, one of Chicago's industrial dynasties. Warren Pike's own lineage. Warren Pike, in 2014, was an elder statesman of the city's art scene, living in a sprawling lakefront home that was a museum unto itself. When Detective O'Rourke and his partner arrived, Pike was charismatic and cooperative. He examined a photograph of the spoon with a practiced eye, expressing a mild, detached surprise. He explained that pieces of the family silver had gone missing over the years, likely stolen by staff during one of the many functions hosted at his homes. He was sorry for the detective's time, but he couldn't possibly recall a specific dessert spoon lost 2 decades ago. It was a perfect, polished dismissal. The investigation turned to the living. Detectives tracked down former employees of the catering company and the mansion's domestic staff. Their memories were faded, clouded by 20 years of life. One former waitress remembered the blizzard, how the guests were in a frantic hurry to leave before they were snowed in. She remembered the catering crews being rushed, overworked. But a quiet Korean delivery driver? She shook her head. There were so many people working in the background, she said. You never really saw them. Robert Kim remained as invisible in memory as he had been in life. Frustrated, O'Rourke's team pivoted to the archives, digging through mountains of microfiche and digitized city records from 1994. They cross-referenced every vendor, contractor, and service provider associated with the Lincoln Park mansion and Warren Pike. The work was tedious, a search for a single discordant note in a symphony of mundane paperwork. They pulled business licenses, tax filings, and waste disposal permits, building a complex social and economic map of the night Robert Kim disappeared. And it was there, buried in a municipal registry of licensed commercial waste haulers, that they found a name: Frank Gallo. His company, Gallo Industrial Solutions, had a blanket contract for refuse removal in that district. On paper, it was a standard, unremarkable operation. But a deeper search into the city's permitting archives revealed a small, curious detail. In 1993, Gallo had applied for and received a special addendum to his license. The permit was for a single vehicle, a heavy-duty flatbed truck, and it was valid for one purpose only: after-hours access to the city's decommissioned industrial zones. With the trail to Warren Pike growing cold, walled off by his reputation and plausible deniability, Detective O'Rourke's team turned their focus back to the victim's immediate circle. They re-examined the 1994 personnel files of the catering company, searching for any hint of internal conflict. There, they found a promising lead: an employee named Leo Trask, a kitchen porter who had been fired 2 weeks before Kim's disappearance for petty theft. A background check revealed Trask also had a record of assault. He was a perfect fit for the profile of a disgruntled ex-employee with a history of violence. A new theory quickly took shape, one that was simple, brutal, and compelling. The investigators hypothesized that Trask, knowing the company's lucrative roots, had targeted the Lincoln Park Gala. Perhaps he was there to steal from the guests' cars, or even from the mansion itself. Robert Kim, the meticulous and honest employee, could have recognized him and confronted him in a back alley. An argument would have ensued, and with his violent temper, Trask could have easily overpowered Kim and silenced him permanently. For the next 3 months, Leo Trask became the sole focus of the investigation. Detectives located him working as a short-order cook in a different state. He was now a man in his 50s, his past seemingly behind him. During hours of questioning, he denied everything, but his memory of that specific night 2 decades ago was, unsurprisingly, a complete blank. Without an alibi, and with his prior record painting a damning picture, the net seemed to be closing. The district attorney's office began cautiously preparing to build a case. The theory collapsed not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a mouse. A rookie analyst, tasked with the mundane job of digitizing old precinct arrest logs from 1994, found the anomaly. On the night of March 12th, at 10 p.m., 1 hour before Robert Kim even finished his shift, Leo Trask was arrested for disorderly conduct at a bar on the opposite side of Chicago. The documentation was ironclad, booking photos, fingerprints, and a magistrate's signature. He had spent the next 48 hours in a county holding cell. He could not have been in Lincoln Park. After months of work, the investigation was back at square one, facing nothing but the same cold silence they had started with. The collapse of the Leo Trask theory was a crushing setback, but for Detective O'Rourke, it served as a course correction. The answer wasn't in a simple street crime. It was somewhere in the rarefied air of Lincoln Park, hidden behind a wall of money and influence. He couldn't let the spoon go. It was the one piece of evidence that didn't fit the narrative of a random mugging. He went back to the source, to the original case file, rereading the faded 1994 interview notes with the mansion's owner. And there it was, a single, overlooked detail. The charity gala wasn't just a party, it was an auction. An auction of fine art and antiques, with all proceeds going to a local children's hospital. Warren Pike hadn't just been a guest, he had been the event's pro bono appraiser and auctioneer. This new context was the key. O'Rourke's team immediately subpoenaed Warren Pike's financial records from 1993 and 1994. The documents they received painted a shocking picture, a portrait of a man drowning in a sea of red ink. His appraisal business was on the verge of collapse. He was leveraged to the hilt with personal loans, and 3 of his properties were in foreclosure proceedings. Warren Pike, the respected philanthropist, had been teetering on the brink of total financial ruin. Then, in the weeks immediately following March 12, 1994, the day Robert Kim vanished, the financial bleeding abruptly stopped. A series of large, untraceable cash deposits began appearing in Pike's accounts, totaling over $200,000. Every debt was paid. Every loan was settled. The crisis was over. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. O'Rourke now had a motive, not rage, not passion, but the cold, desperate calculus of a man trying to save his reputation. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with a phone call from the county clerk's office. Frank Gallo, the owner of the Industrial Disposal Service, had died 6 months prior. His warehouse was now in probate, scheduled for clean-out. Armed with a warrant, O'Rourke and his team sifted through decades of Gallo's meticulously kept, albeit illicit, business records. In a dusty, leather-bound ledger, they found the entry for March 12, 1994. It was written in a clean, clear hand, containing just 7 words that broke the case wide open. WP, silo cleanup, rush job, paid in full. WP Warren Pike. The scattered details, the spoon, the auction, the sudden cash, the ledger, now formed a single, terrifying and undeniable picture. Based on Warren Pike's eventual confession, the events of that night were reconstructed with chilling clarity. Pike had arrived at the Lincoln Park mansion not as a guest, but as a predator. His plan was audacious, born of pure desperation. He had commissioned a set of masterful forgeries of the host's antique silver service, and his intention was to swap them out during the chaos of the gala, selling the genuine articles on the black market to save himself from bankruptcy. He waited until the end of the night, as the final staff were clearing out and the blizzard was intensifying. In the narrow, dimly lit service alley behind the mansion, he began the swap. It was then that Robert Kim, on his way to the bus stop after completing his own duties, turned the corner. He saw Pike, a man he recognized from the gala, carefully placing the real silver into a felt-lined bag. Kim, a man of simple honor, did not shout or make a scene. He simply stopped and asked Pike what he was doing. It was a quiet question, but for Pike, it was an accusation that threatened to detonate his entire world. A panicked rage, cold and absolute, seized him. In the trunk of his car was a heavy tire iron. He told Kim to wait, that there was a simple explanation. What happened next was a blur of brutal, explosive motion. The air in the alley was punctured by a sickening, dull thud, followed by a gasp, and then the sound of a body collapsing onto the snow-dusted asphalt. Robert Kim fell, his life extinguished in an instant, a silent witness to a crime he never intended to see. In the frantic struggle to move the body into his car's trunk, Pike worked hastily. He didn't notice that one of the stolen dessert spoons had slipped from his bag, sliding unnoticed into the cuff of Kim's coat. It was a tiny, accidental detail that would become his undoing. He drove away from the mansion, his mind racing. He needed the body to disappear, not just to be hidden, but to be erased. He made a single call to a man he knew who specialized in making problems vanish: Frank Gallo. Gallo met Pike on the city's industrial fringe. For a substantial cash payment, he led Pike to the abandoned grain silo complex, a place he knew would not be disturbed for years, if ever. Together, under the cover of the raging blizzard, they forced Robert Kim's body into the narrow grain chute, a final act of desecration designed to ensure he would never be found. They drove away, two men bound by a dark secret, leaving behind only the falling snow to cover their tracks. The arrest of Warren Pike sent a shockwave through Chicago. The image of the elderly philanthropist, a man whose name adorned museum wings and charity plaques, being led from his lakefront home in handcuffs, was a spectacle of the highest order. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. Pike, a man who had built a life on the curation of beautiful objects and a carefully crafted public persona, was now the subject of a far grislier exhibition. His trial was the city's main event. The prosecution, led by Detective O'Rourke's meticulous casework, laid out the narrative with cold, irrefutable precision. The silver spoon, Exhibit A, lay on a velvet cloth for the jury to see. The financial records were presented as a clear motive, a portrait of a man so terrified of losing his status that he would resort to murder. Frank Gallo's ledger was the final nail in the coffin, the quiet voice from the grave that condemned a killer. Pike's defense team attempted to portray him as a frail old man, a victim of circumstance, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts. Warren Pike was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read, his face a mask of detached resignation. His empire of lies had finally crumbled, brought down by the memory of an invisible man and a single misplaced piece of silver. He would die in a state penitentiary 4 years later, a world away from the auction houses and galas he had once commanded. For Robert Kim's family, the verdict brought a strange and hollow sense of closure. His younger sister, now a university professor in Seoul, attended the trial. She listened to the details of her brother's final moments through a translator, her face a stoic mask of grief. After the sentencing, she told reporters through a statement that justice could not return her brother, but it had finally given him a name and a story again. He was no longer just a casualty of a blizzard, but a man who had died for an act of quiet integrity. The city that had forgotten him for 20 years was now forced to remember. The grain silo complex on the industrial outskirts of Chicago no longer exists. The structures were fully demolished, the ground leveled and seeded, erasing the steel tomb from the city's landscape. Where the chute once stood, there is now only flat, empty land awaiting redevelopment. But near the property's chain-link fence, local residents sometimes leave a small, makeshift memorial, a simple cross or a handful of flowers, a quiet acknowledgement of the man who was lost there and then found. The silver spoon, the single object that held the truth for 2 decades, was catalogued as the final piece of evidence in the state's case against Warren Pike. Following the trial, Detective O'Rourke, in one of his last official acts before retirement, offered to have it sent to Robert Kim's sister in Seoul. She respectfully declined, requesting it be given a different home, a place where its story could be permanently told. Today, the Pike family dessert spoon rests in a glass case at the Chicago History Museum, part of a permanent exhibit on the city's most compelling unsolved mysteries. It sits alone on a black velvet cloth, illuminated by a single focused spotlight. The placard next to it does not mention Warren Pike's name. It simply reads, found with the remains of Robert Kim, 1962 to 1994. His integrity was worth more than its weight in silver. The case serves as a permanent, chilling reminder of a core truth in any complex investigation. Wealth and influence can build walls of silence, and power can obscure the facts for a time. But the truth itself is patient. It can be buried in concrete, hidden in a ledger, or tucked away in the cuff of a dead man's sleeve. And in the end, the story of a powerful man's downfall was told not through headlines or fortunes, but by the silent, unyielding weight of a single silver spoon.